It is now the full-time off-season in the National Hockey League, which means that random grab-bag topics like this one are all the rage. Let's talk about another post made on the Toronto Maple Leafs subreddit that I ended up seeing the other day. And again, I know, I'm a Canucks fan. What am I doing in the Leafs subreddit? I have no idea, but your answer is as good as mine. Let's go out there and talk about a trade that shook the hockey world last year. Because when the Toronto Maple Leafs lost out on goaltender Jack Campbell, there was a gaping hole in this lineup that needed to be addressed. Sure, there were some other guys that could have the potential to fill in that spot, but 1 year ago we had ourselves a trade made between the Leafs and the Ottawa Senators trying to go out there and address that need too. Let's talk about the Matt Murray trade. 1 year since everything went down, and discuss where these assets are today, whether or not the trade was a good trade to make, and what the repercussions of that ended up being. The trade was made July 11th, 2022, so we're technically late in making this 1 year later video. It's been a year and 2 days, but I think it's close enough that we could still go out there and talk about it. The trade goes as follows. The Maple Leafs announced a year ago that they have acquired goalie Matt Murray, a third-round pick in the 2023 draft, and a seventh in the 2024 draft from Ottawa in exchange for future considerations. The Sens retained 25% of Matt Murray's salary as a part of the trade. Now, this isn't that complicated of a move. It really is just the Maple Leafs taking on Matt Murray, along with some extra picks, in order for the Sens to free up that roster spot. They got Cam Talbot, they wanted to free up a goalie spot, and this trade with Toronto is how Ottawa ended up getting rid of Matt Murray. Sure, there was salary retained there, but the Maple Leafs were getting the goalie that they believed in, and they were also getting the draft picks. We'll talk about those picks a little bit more as the video goes on, but Matt Murray was making an AAV on the Ottawa Senators payroll of $6.25 million a year. 25% retained means that the Maple Leafs have $4.6 million on their books until the end of 23-24. Matt Murray is 29 years old, and in the final season he had with the Sens, he had a .906 save percentage in 20 games played, a .305 goals against, and he went 5-12-2 with one shutout. With the Toronto Maple Leafs, though, Matt Murray posted up very similar numbers. 26 games played, a .903 save percentage this time, so a worse save percentage, but a lower goals against average as well. He had a 3.01 goals against. He also had one shutout, and this time he was 14-10. The Maple Leafs are a much better team than the Ottawa Senators, so it's understandable to see where some of these numbers come from, but the pure, regular save percentage number behind it shows that Matt Murray had somewhat of a worse year. In the playoffs, Murray didn't play any games either. You had Wall and Samsonov sharing the load, and so now you have to acknowledge that with the Toronto Maple Leafs cap situation being in the way that it is, they've got this guy who's making $4.6 million on their payroll. He's got a modified no-trade clause. You've got to re-sign Ilya Samsonov, and the player you thought you were getting in Murray ended up not being as good of a get as you probably hoped he would be. If you wanted to talk about the draft picks, well, okay, one of them was used in the 2023 draft. The other one has not been used yet, so we'll wait until 2024 to see what exactly it is the Murray trade details end up fully becoming. But the Toronto Maple Leafs actually traded the third-round pick that they got from the Ottawa Senators away in the three-team trade with the Blues and the Minnesota Wild in order for them to acquire Ryan O'Reilly. So they didn't actually use the draft pick, and from this future considerations deal with the Sens, they only really got Matt Murray. You could try to map out a bunch of other stuff too, because they traded away Goddard and all this other stuff, but yeah, no, we're just gonna stick with Matt Murray here. There's a 7th-round pick in 2024. We'll see what Brad Treliving decides to do with it then. But this is the post on the Leafs subreddit that kind of sparked up this entire video in the first place. A year ago today, we traded for Matt Murray. How do you view that trade now? Considering we're potentially buying Murray out, how do you view that trade today? The top comment from CTH07 says this: "A lot of people here are afraid to call a spade a spade. Ottawa tried the trade into Buffalo days before he got traded to the Leafs. The only reason the deal didn't go through was because Murray refused to waive his no-trade clause. Dubas saw Pierre Dorian's hand, and one of the only teams willing to take Murray was now off the list. Absolutely all of the leverage now belonged to Dubas because if the Sens bought out Murray, he was already interested in joining the Leafs. So, naturally, Dubas got a worse return than Buffalo. The next reply says that Dubas was always blindsided by his guys. Murray is a Dubas guy, and that's not an unfair assessment. I mean, yeah, the Sue Greyhound connection, it got pretty old towards the end, I would feel. You could definitely see the patterns emerging from the way Dubas would acquire players. And then you have yourselves this conversation as to whether or not Dubas is actually bad at assessing goalie talent. Isran went out there and said this, we saw it here multiple times. Now he gave that monster deal to Jari, and that's going to age terribly. Regarding Matt Murray himself, this was another comment from Commander Shepard and Seven. I didn't like the trade. And then Murray played out of his mind against Dallas in one of the finest goalie performances I've ever seen from the Leafs. It won me over. And then he lost me again by late January before getting injured. Never got it back. Another comment here says, it was a bad trade in retrospect, but sometimes you just lose out on gambles. Matt Murray had potential and looked great when he could play, but he just can't stay healthy anymore. They gambled on our medical staff, who's worked miracles and lost, but look at how Sammy worked out, and Woll. I have no qualms with Dubas' last years in Toronto, and it's not really like he did any dumb, spiteful stuff either when he was on the outs, like signing terrible deals or sending the future away by trying a final Hail Mary. At the end of the day, that trade was a hockey move that didn't work out, and the Leafs got assets with Murray. Buying him out is not an issue. People worry about the cap needlessly over stuff like this. I also think he could be traded to a bottom feeder who wants to hit the cap floor. And this is one of the more calmer perspectives on the entire trade, because they do say that Dubas, it's not like he screwed the team over in his last few years. I know he made the video yesterday talking about how he handcuffed the team with the contracts given out to big money stars, but in the ways that this user is articulating, Dubas didn't make any big final Hail Mary trades that really put the team in a bad spot, like say Jim Benning, for example. Oliver Ekman-Larsson trade before getting fired, that was terrible. Absolutely doomed the Canucks for the next decade and a bit. And if you talk about Dubas, he didn't necessarily do that. For Matt Murray, if you wanted to buy this guy out, he's expiring in 2024, so a buyout would prolong that contract being on your cap hit until 2025, which isn't really that bad. But at the same time, buying a guy out who just happened to be an experiment that didn't work is a lot easier to stomach than worst case scenario, that Jim Benning, Oliver Ekman-Larsson deal from a few years ago. Let's go over onto one more comment because I do think that this brings up an interesting perspective. It was a high-risk trade, to be honest. Murray wasn't bad when he played, and he had some great starts for us, but goodness, he cannot stay healthy. And this is sort of where high-risk, high-reward comes into play, because the next comment says, it literally defined high-risk, high-reward. But then you have yourselves another reply that says, I feel like it was a high-risk, low-reward. Best case scenario, we get league average or slightly above league average goalie, and a guy who hasn't been healthy in 4 years magically stays healthy at the cost of $5 million a year. That's average starter money. Why gamble it on a guy who is often injured for such minimal upside? And so, whether or not you think that the Matt Murray trade was a good one or a bad one or whatever, it was a trade. It happened. You could see the motivation behind Dubas's perception in the deal because he was getting a Sioux guy, he was getting a guy who maybe had some upside to give. I mean, we all saw the press conference, we all heard what it was the Maple Leafs were expecting out of Murray. Assuming he would be able to stay healthy, this guy may be able to bounce back because Dubas believes in him and they feel like they have the team to support him, so he could get back to what he was when he was winning back-to-back Stanley Cups with Marc-Andre Fleury and the Penguins, and it didn't work out, unfortunately. Now you have to think about buying this player out, and the repercussions of that in your cap, I mean, you're kind of handcuffed already, so this may not be an issue of if, but more so rather when. Unless, of course, you're able to actually get somebody to get that contract. Some team that needs to reach the cap floor is trying to look for goalies, and you try to convince Murray to waive his no move or whatever it is. Yeah, no trade, excuse me. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. It's been a year since the Matt Murray trade occurred. What are your thoughts about that now? If you're an Ottawa Senators fan, how do you feel about letting go of Murray, having Cam Talbot come in instead, having him perform in the way that he did, having him leave, signing Korpisalo instead, and seeing where everything goes from there? What are your thoughts on the Matt Murray saga in Ottawa, how things went since then, and if you're a Leafs fan, what are your opinions on how the events transpired after that as well? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.